Yeah. My apologies for being late.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you for
something come up that was
What was that?
top secret, high security.
Yeah.
We had a little incident on the Bertha project, which is unfortunately not unique. That project, so we've been taking a look at that.
There's probably no such thing as a little incident on the Bertha project.
No.
I think that sometimes you have to be a nerd to all kinds of travails in big projects,
Yeah.
especially ones where there are not a lot of other options.
That's right. Great. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started here. We'd like to welcome Governor Jay Inslee to meet with the Columbian editorial board. I know you don't have a lot of time. You've been busy, so we'll kind of jump right into it and try and keep things moving. And just so you know, as always, we're recording this for use on our website. So as we head into the legislative session, what do you think will come out of that regarding McCleary? Not what you hope. What do you think realistically will?
I think there is every reason to be optimistic that we're going to have the first step in a two-step process.
And what is that?
Which is to have a framework to figure out the nature of how we get to the investment, both level and types of investment, to reduce the burden on local communities and the local levies and have more state support for our educational system. And that is an important step to really focus on that first. It is necessary for the education of our kids. It's also helpful to remove judicial scrutiny in this regard, but mostly it's important for the education of our kids. And we got to collect some data to actually do that, and we have to get legislators focused on that task. And the good news is that we've been successful to date with my bipartisan group I've assembled. As you know, I assembled a bipartisan group. Senator Rivers was part of that group. They have prepared a bipartisan and bicameral plan that they've now introduced that I think is a really good framework to at least start the discussions. So I'm reasonably optimistic that they will produce that because it's absolutely necessary. It's necessary for the education of our children. It's necessary to hone in on what the nature of the investment would be. It's necessary to really find out what the expenditures are in these local districts and how much of their local money is actually going, for instance, to support teacher compensation. And that's necessary to get to the second step, which is actually providing the financing, which has to happen in the 2017 legislative session. And I think there's a reason to be optimistic about that, too, because, frankly, legislators, when they have set deadlines, they actually have met them. And we are, and this is a big secret, so try to keep this secret.
We're good at that.
Okay. But in the last two sessions of the legislature, we put over $5 billion into education of new money. We put $2.3 billion in this budget. Full day K, smaller class sizes, early child education, more mentoring, teacher salary increase. The only state in the United States with tuition relief, a tuition cut this year in the whole country, we're the only state that achieved that. So we have had, I would describe them as enormous investments in education in the last two biennium. We've had a 35% increase, and I'm sorry if I think in numbers, but that's how I think. We've had a 35% increase in educational funding in real terms since I've been governor. So we have I think, a recognition that legislators are willing to, make substantial investment. But now we need to take the next step, which on the financing aspect of it needs to be in 2017. But the framework has to be this year, and I'm insistent on that.
But you talk about a framework this year. Isn't that something that should have been done 4 years ago when McCleary was handed down?
Could have been. Could have been.
Or 2 years ago?
But, right now, great. And I've got a divided legislature. If I could write the policy alone, may have been. I think it would have been. But we have a group that of some different minds on this. There is some different aptitude and willingness to make this investment. It is difficult, but there are because there are still quite a number of voices that are saying that we should not have to do this. I don't believe that's the majority, but there are voices in the legislature that believes that we should just ignore this issue. I think that's the minority, but still there are voices to that effect. So we have to work through and around that. As I've said, I'm happy that this bipartisan group has got this framework started. So I don't intend to defend the legislature, but I do intend to get them to get the work done. And that's what I want to see them get done.
And how, in your supplemental budget, you proposed raising teacher salaries.
Right.
How has that been received? What's the reaction been from lawmakers?
I think it's kind of a new idea, frankly, and I think this idea, this recognition of how severe this teacher shortage is a little bit of new news to legislators, frankly. It's kind of burst upon us. But as I've gone around the state, I just talked to principals and superintendents that just don't have bodies in the classroom. We think we're about 7,000 short on teachers right now, and it's pretty uniform, urban, rural, east and west.
Now, is that short of what we need now, or what we would need with smaller class sizes?
In the next 2 or 3 years. It's
Okay.
fairly short term. And the reason is that we're having large retirements because the baby boomers are getting to that age, and we are not retaining new teachers. We have a 50% loss ratio for our new teachers in the first 5 years.
Do you know where that stat comes from?
Well, it comes from a variety of sources. I don't think there's much issue about it. I
Okay.
think you'll find it's pretty well accepted. And I think it's that problem is the biggest problem is lack of compensation. These people, they work for 2 years, they eat macaroni and cheese for 2 years, and they go to work for Microsoft or a high-tech company doing something or other. I mean, I sat next to a guy. I was going to Spokane during the windstorm and asked him what he's doing. He says, I'm a pharmaceutical salesman. He said, I used to be a teacher. And I said, oh, yeah, what happened? He said, you didn't like it? And he said, no, I love teaching. It was great. But, I couldn't feed my family. I had 2 kids. I just couldn't feed them. So I'm selling pharmaceuticals now. And I think you hear that story over and over again. So we are suggesting a raise of $4,000 from $36,000 to $40,000 for new teachers, and then 1% for all teachers, just as a kind of statement of good faith, because we got to have teachers in the classroom. I mean, I think all of us are looking for innovation. How do we innovate? How do we get better production in math and science? And we're seeing a lot of innovation in our schools. I mean, I was at Foster High School in Tacoma. They've increased their graduation 15%. They've gone from 25% math compliance to 60 or 70% through some new innovative mechanism. But if you don't have a teacher in a classroom, you just don't have anything. So this is, I think the extent of this problem is something legislators are just starting to understand. So I'm hopeful that they can act this year because, as I said, third grader only has one shot at third grade. And if you don't have a teacher there, that's not the deal. And when you talk to principals, what they tell you is I'm spending a very significant part of my time being a substitute, and I can't be the leader then of the building. So I'm hopeful that we can get this through this year.
Quick question. If you had to, and you don't have to elaborate on this, but if you had to name 3 things that you want the state of Washington to be known for, either nationally or internationally, what would the 3 things be?
Super Bowl champs. I'm teasing. That's number 4.
Okay.
So, that's number 4. That's number 4. It's an interesting question. Let me give 10 seconds of thought to that. Well, from day one, I've been focused on job creation in our state. I think having a job and the ability to provide for your family and have a stable economic platform for your family is very, very important to us all. And so I have focused on job creation, and that has been job 1 in my book. So if I had to ask what I would hope to be successful in, it would be that first. And the good news is we have had, really good success on this. We've created almost 250,000 jobs since I took the oath. Inside Business Magazine just yesterday ranked us as the best economy in the United States. We have an 8% growth rate, which is just astounding. We have, for the first time, and this is important to me because I came from a small town in eastern Washington where I lived for a couple decades. I'm not just a big city guy. For the first time in 8 years, we have unemployment down to the single digits in every single county in the state. Now, there's still wide disparity, but to get that down that much in every county in the state, I'm very pleased about that. So we have a lot of economic growth and job creation, so I'm happy about
You
that.
got 2 more.
Second, our educational, to give every child an opportunity in the new economy is, it's our paramount duty, not just as governors or legislators, but as parents and grandparents. And I have the 3 cutest grandkids in the state. I warrant that. And so, that's our paramount duty. Third is, kind of a tie for a lot of things. I guess what I would say is I'm going to put it in a basket if I can. Can I have a basket on the third?
Sure.
So I would say the basket is that we retain the kind of values that make Washington what I consider a really special place to live. And I think we have a culture here that has a value system that allows people to be who they are, to love who they want, to have clean air and clean water, to be welcoming and tolerant of each other and civil in our communities. There's a kind of a Washington value system, I would say, and if we could retain that, because I really think we are a special culture in a lot of ways. I think our economic success is in part because of this, because we have welcomed people from around the world. You go to any of our high-tech companies here and you'll see we have welcomed people, engineers from India and software computer coding people from Ireland, and we've built these incredible businesses because of it. And I think that has been part of our economic success. Our environmental ethic here, which has kept clean air and clean water, is a precious heritage. And the older I get, the better off Washington looks, and I understand how important clean air and clean water is. So maintaining that basket.
Now, I noticed that potentially being the house for the world's largest oil terminal didn't make it into that list. Would it be fair to say that wouldn't be on a top list for you?
It will be on the very top of my list when it gets on the list.
Okay, so
when it gets to me, it'll be an important decision.
But it's not what you would want the state to be known for.
You mean to be an oil terminal or to not be an oil terminal?
You wouldn't want the state to be known as having the world's largest oil terminal.
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't. Would that be like on a brochure somewhere? Come to Washington.
I would say that I don't think that's how I would make the decision.
Okay? No, we're not talking about the decision.
So this is important to have this discussion. So in this, I know how intense the feelings are about this subject. I have some sense of how intense the feelings are in this community about that subject. But I serve as sort of a quasi-judicial office in the permitting, and I have to be very careful what I say about this project. So I have not evinced any feelings or positions on this, and I intend to hew to that until all of the permitting process gets to me. And I guess what I would say is I'm going to follow the law in the permitting process, not the politics or the image. You're kind of asking me an image issue?
Right.
And I guess what I'm saying is I'm going to make a decision based on the law of the permitting process rather than my considerations of politics or image, self-image or state image.
But even if you approved it, and I know that we're not there yet, mm-hmm. That wouldn't end up on a brochure as, come live in Washington, home of the world's largest oil company.
We probably would find some other things to talk about.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
So do you have anything else?
Well, politics that you can talk about. You think you're a lock?
A lock?
Yeah, for the governorships.
Oh man, I'm never a lock for anything. Ask Minnesota about being a lock.
Oh, back to football. Okay, no, I got that. I got that. So, I mean, what do you think? You think you're gonna be in a dogfight?
I feel good about what's going on in our state, and I think I've played a role in some of the good things that are going on. I feel good about what we're doing. I'm trying to avoid talking about those issues because I'm focused on this session right now and helping us get our job done. I'm really trying to focus on that and kind of put aside, by and large, those considerations. And I'm trying to fashion some bipartisan solutions too. And that's hard work sometimes because people have different views. And so I'm trying to make clear that I want to help legislators find a bipartisan solution to the school funding issue. I'd like to find a bipartisan solution to the mental health issue because we have underfunding, significant underfunding still of some of our mental health issues. We got to find a bipartisan solution to our fire financing, and I hope we find a bipartisan solution to the teacher shortage. So I think the more I focus on that rather than the campaign that might happen someday, the better off we are. So that's about as much as I want to say right now.
But the campaign, it's not going to might happen. I mean, the campaign is going to happen.
I believe that's a safe bet.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about something that hasn't gone well. The state mistakenly released, I believe, 3,200 prisoners.
Right.
What is being done about that?
Everything we can.
Meaning what?
Well, we're taking very strong action to respond to a very, very serious failure by the Department of Corrections. You can't understate how significant this failure was by the Department of Corrections. So from the moment I learned about this, I immediately knew about the severity and significance of this. And so we've taken, I believe, very strong and positive action to deal with this. And I'll just go through some of the things we've done. Number one, I immediately told the Department of Corrections not to release anyone until there was an assured hand mathematical count of their sentence. And that should have happened a long, long time ago. When the department was given this advice by this Assistant Attorney General that they could just continue to release people for a while, it is inconceivably why that former Attorney General, by the way, that Attorney General at that time was working for a different Attorney General, not the one that's there now. So we immediately said no more releases until we get accurate hand count. So that's the first thing that we did. Second, we immediately wanted an assessment of all the people who should have been in custody but were not in custody. And so we immediately had the Department of Corrections to find out everyone who should have been in custody. And third, we basically are bringing those people back into custody to serve the time that they were due the state under their accurate assessment of their sentence. Fourth, we started an independent, and I stress independent, and comprehensive review of how this debacle happened. And I've hired 2 former federal prosecutors, United States Attorney General prosecutors with 60 years of criminal prosecution experience, and they are now in the midst of that investigation. And we wanted it to be comprehensive. We didn't want to just do some sort of symbolic accountability here. We wanted to be comprehensive to root out the source of this problem. So they've now started the interviews. They're going to review all of the digital information and paperwork about how this thing happened. And then the fifth thing we're going to have accountability for the people who bear responsibility for this failure. And that will be done as soon as we can figure out who had the responsibility for this failure. Now, because we want that...
By accountability, you mean people will lose their jobs?
I can't see any reason that would not happen. And we're not just talking about one person necessarily either. We haven't reached conclusions like that, but we want to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to follow it wherever it leads. People should be irate about this. I'm irate about this. This is beyond imagination how people made such poor decisions at the Department of Corrections. We're going to get to the bottom of this and then have accountability. Now, what we know today is, I'll just briefly run down you what we know today. We know that there was an error in 2002, 2 governors before me, that basically did not build in what you call a fail-safe that assured that people did not get more than 33% of their time in good behavior. Computer error, if you will. 2012 brought to the department's attention. They fixed it for one of the inmates, but they decided to continue to release people of unknown numbers prior to their sentence running up. Unbelievably bad decision. After getting Attorney General's opinion that told them they could go ahead to continue that. Now, I practiced law for 20 years. That's probably the worst advice I'm aware of. And then the department did not, because they can repair their computer program quarterly, they scheduled this repair for the computer to be done, but it didn't happen for many, many times. And it got bumped every time by what they considered to be higher priority issues in the department. And we want to get to the bottom of how that decision was made to have such repeated failure, because this is a mission critical function of the department, is to make sure people serve their sentences. So why these individuals made a decision that this mission critical thing was not of a higher priority to get this done is unacceptable to me. It's also unacceptable to me that even if they never had a computer, that they didn't do this by hand. You know, we've been keeping people in jails for several centuries by hand. The Bastille didn't have a computer, but they managed to do it. So this is totally unacceptable to me, and we are in the process of fixing it. The department has already instituted, at my direction, of a system to have a systematic way to prioritize computer fixes. They need to have a more systematic way to have priorities about what is really necessary to fix. And they're going through that right now. We have also sent...
Is that for all state agencies or just corrections?
Yes, first corrections, but I've sent a directive to all my state cabinet members to have all of their computer systems undergo a review to see if they have a systematic way to prioritize upgrades of their computer systems. We think that was one reason for this failure at the Department of Corrections. So we sent that out 2 or 3 days ago, and they're in the midst of doing that work now. This has been extremely painful to me. I've had to talk to some family members who lost family members of people who should have been in custody at the time. And I'm very serious about both having accountability here and fixing this problem. So that's a rundown of a very painful episode.
Well, and then moving on, as I said, we're going to try and keep it moving here. You mentioned, speaking of poor decisions and accountability, should the legislature work to impeach Troy Kelly?
I'm going to defer largely to the legislature on this question. What should happen is the auditor should resign. He should resign for multiple reasons, one of which is he has been incapable of doing his job. And that's what should happen. I'm going to defer largely to the legislators to see if that's a high enough priority for them to deal with that in this 60-day session. I've talked to some legislators that say, we're going to have the criminal prosecution shortly. We'll just wait for that to happen, and that ought to solve the problem. But I'll listen to their advice about this.
If you were in the legislature, would it be a high enough priority for you? Would you try and tackle that this session?
It depends on... Look, we got to get this McCleary thing resolved. Yeah. That's the highest priority. What I would say is, if you can accommodate both, great. And I would talk to legislators to see, can we accommodate both? Great, then let's do both. If we can't, then maybe you wait for the criminal trial. But I'm not making any excuses for the auditor. He should have resigned a long time ago, and the fact that he is not is disturbing to me.
What's the biggest thing that has surprised you since you've been governor?
The great editorials for the Columbian.
That shouldn't have been a surprise.
The greatest surprise. Tough question. A little bit of there's good and bad surprise. The good surprise is all of the people that I didn't know before who are doing such incredibly inspiring things in the state of Washington. I'm going to start with the good surprise, then I'll get to the negative side. The good, it's not a surprise, but it's a pleasant occurrence, is that every day I meet somebody who's doing some extraordinary thing in the state of Washington, and it is such a joy, and it happens in sort of unexpected places. I was just telling a story about Peyton Rush, the kid down here at Crestline School. I've told you guys this about story. Have I told you this story? I came down here when Crestline School burned down.
Right. Yeah.
And I met the student body, and I asked them, how to go. I know we had to ship you guys out. They had to go to new schools, young people, traumatic thing. And I asked him, what have you learned from this experience? And this little 5th grader, Peyton Rush, raised his hand. And I said, what I learned is that this is really hard, but we can do hard things. And I went home and told my mom that, and she's a graphic designer, and they both made a sign that says, we can do hard things. And so we put it up over our classroom to inspire the kids in this traumatic exercise. And I just thought that was the coolest story. So we've kind of adopted that as our slogan of our administration. And if you come to my office, I hope you do someday, you'll see that sign.
You don't have a don't do stupid stuff?
No, that's there that's on the credenza.
Oh,
they got this next to the door.
All right. Close second.
and you just meet people that are just inspiring like that, in sort of unusual, unexpected, places. And I just see that all over. I meet people who are doing this innovative work. I mean, a few months ago, I met the people at Juno, actually about a year ago, at Juno, that now has this cancer-fighting drug using T cells. That they came up with this idea to take T cells out of your body when you have cancer, genetically manipulate them, and then put them back in, and they tune in to super cancer cell. And now they've had the largest IPO in world history or American history, and for a biotech company, it's $1 billion company. And last year it was just an idea, 2 years ago. And they've decided to stay in the state of Washington. They looked to go everywhere else, but I went to work, and we've been able to keep them, both their research and their manufacturing, in the state of Washington. So I guess what I'd say is that it's pleasing, not a huge surprise, but just to have that opportunity to meet these incredible people. On the negative side is that, look, when you become governor and you're running a, $36 billion enterprise and 55,000 people and 7 million citizens, a lot of things coming at you, just a lot of things coming at you, and you got to keep a lot of balls up in the air. So.
Can you give me an example of one of those things that came at you?
The Bertha, we just had a thing today again. It was a little sinkhole in this project that is, the world's biggest boring project. It's a world history. It's never been done before.
Like this?
Yes, both. No, it's been unfortunately not boring. You wish things would always go smoothly. This has not, and that's the kind of thing that keeps you up at night.
Yeah.
What do you think is that? Well, let me ask it this way: can you envision that by the end of your second term, you would see something to substitute for the CRC coming toward your desk?
I think it's possible. I think it's a heavy lift because the community needs to find a unified vision of its future on this crossing, and it has to be. There are two communities that need to be unified. The Clark County, Southwest Washington community needs to come up with sort of a unified plan that isn't going to be torpedoed by your own legislators. And if you come up with a plan, but it's torpedoed by your own legislators, you just can't pass it no matter how good the plan is. Mm-hmm. Because the way our state democracy works, by and large, is the state will follow the lead of the local legislators on a local project. So even if you had 98% of the legislators in the state believe that a particular crossing plan was good for the state, you're still not going to be able to get that through a state legislature if the local legislators want to torpedo it. And that's what happened here. You had local legislators that wanted to sink the bridge, and they did. And I think it was most unfortunate. I did everything I could to try to rescue it because I know how important it is to the state and Clark County. So it was very disappointing. But you also have to have an agreement with Oregon because every bridge has two ends, and you just can't build a one-ended bridge. And so those are the two things, the two pieces of the puzzle that will have to come together. And the third, of course, is financing.
So,
and right now, unfortunately, we have people who still think that there's a hot air balloon with several $1 billion that are going to float in here, and after the federal money is unlikely to be available to us at the moment anyway, we have to be realistic. And I really do believe we have to focus on the I-5 corridor. We have to have an I-5 corridor that is not built on wooden piers sunk during the Woodrow Wilson administration. That is imperative. We have to fix that corridor. Now, if there are other things other people want to go with, floating bridges or Bailey bridges from the Army Corps engineer, okay, but we got to fix that corridor. Mm-hmm. It's too fragile. A small earthquake and we shut down a large part of our economy. So
that means the first priority is rebuilding this.
First priority has got to be the I-5 bridge because
bridge,
it is so critical to the economy of the whole region to have the I-5 corridor being viable. Now I think that's possible, but again, we're going to have to get the community to come together around this. And my role, I think, is to try to help, to the extent I can, reach some, consensus. But again, it's going to have to involve Oregon too, though. Yeah. So we have some work to do.
Hey, wait a second. He never listened to you when you said that the first 4 times.
Then one more really quick.
Yes.
Will the legislature get out of there in 60 days?
Should.
But will
there's no reason.
But will it?
Should. And I think they will. And they should. There's really no reason not to finish on time this year. Last two bienniums we had folks that didn't want to do teacher raises, didn't want to close a couple loopholes, didn't want to do this, that, and the other, had to work harder on transportation package. Took a lot longer than I would have liked. We did get great products, though. This transportation bill is a big deal. We just announced our $80 million multiple projects in Mill Plain and Port Vancouver and the Transit Center. This is huge. This is the largest transportation package in the history of the state of Washington. It's the cleanest transportation package in the history of the state of Washington. It's great things for Southwest Washington. It took longer than we would have liked, but it's a really good product. But this year, there's no reason not to finish within 60 days. They need to buckle down, get this framework done, finance a few of these things, and go home. And I expect them to do that.
Great. Well, Governor, thank you very much for
Thank
your time.
you. Good luck.